Good morning from the beautiful JW Marriott in Washington, D.C. My name is Jamie Adams, and I am the Senior Advisor for the U.S. Department of Agriculture.
And I'm Fatma Mullah, Director of Partnerships and Special Projects at the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment. Today, we are honored to welcome all of you joining us in person and online to the first Aim4C Summit. Special thanks to the Secretary Vilsack and his team for making this all possible. The Aim for Climate Summit is an event for the partners by the partners to raise ambition, build collaborations, and share knowledge on climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation in the lead-up to COP28. Aim for Climate partners have shaped a robust 3-day agenda summit through hosting high-level plenaries, breakout sessions, interactive exhibits, and site tours.
Thank you for traveling from around the world to join us. And thank you to all the summit sponsors, including our supporting sponsor, the Government of Canada. A complete list of summit sponsors is available on the event website. A special thank you to the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research for your support of the Aim for Climate Summit. Thank you for helping turn this dream into a reality.
We have a packed agenda over the next 3 days. Every day, here in the Grand Ballroom and online, we will have high-level plenaries. 27 breakout sessions, 9 each day, will be hosted by Aim for Climate partners in Capitol Ballroom's salons E, F, and G. Today, the US and UAE will co-host the second Aim for Climate Ministerial, and tomorrow, the United Kingdom will host the Agriculture Breakthrough Ministerial. And the interactive exhibit hall, organized in collaboration with the SDG2 Advocacy Hub, is located just outside the Grand Ballroom and will be open from 10:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. daily. We're also excited that partners are offering a range of tours, amazing opportunities to experience first-hand innovations in climate-smart agriculture. Thank you so much to our hosts for making this incredible experience possible.
We have an exciting opening plenary session ahead. To kick things off, ladies and gentlemen, it is a pleasure to introduce you to a remarkable leader, a true inspiration to many, who has made a significant impact in her field. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage U.S. Department of Agriculture's Chief Scientist and Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics, Dr. Shavonda Jacobs-Young.
Good morning. All right. Welcome to the Aim for Climate Summit. We have been preparing for you all for many, many months, and the time has finally come. So welcome to those who are in the room with us today and for those who are joining us online. I am Shavonda Jacobs-Young, Undersecretary for Research, Education, and Economics, and USDA Chief Scientist. We've convened you all this week for the Aim for Climate Summit so the partners can come together, increase and accelerate investment in climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation. We simply want to raise our global ambition. This event has catalyzed a surge in new partners. Now over 500 partners compared to 275 partners just 6 months ago in Egypt. Imagine that, truly amazing. That's right, thank you. So thank you for your support of Aim for Climate, for being here, and most importantly, for working with us to advance innovation that is critical for feeding a growing global population, while also addressing the challenges of climate change. I know I'm looking forward to meeting new people, reacquainting with some of my colleagues, and most importantly, building collaborations. I hope that each of you will do the same. So now it is my high honor to introduce my boss, U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack.
Go ahead. Good job. Yeah. Dr. Jacob, thank you very much for getting us started this morning. And I want to take this opportunity to thank Jamie and Fatma for an incredible effort. These two women have been the driving force, notwithstanding what the minister, my good friend Miriam Al-Mahari, has done. These two women have done an amazing job, so I'd like you to give them a round of applause for Ministers and distinguished guests and Vice President Gore, I'd like to begin by welcoming all of our AIM for Climate partners who are joining us here today and online. And I especially want to acknowledge my co-lead, Her Excellency Minister Al-Mahari, who is a great friend. I want to also extend thanks to the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research for supporting this event and working with the U.S. and the UAE AIM for Climate teams to make this summit a reality. Today, AIM for Climate is a groundbreaking worldwide coalition of more than 400 partners across government, private industry, nonprofits, and academia. We are bringing forth ideas, investment, and action toward a shared goal. Unfortunately, our end goal, to feed a growing population, is not getting easier to meet. Just last week, the United Nations reminded all of us of the harsh reality of hunger in our world. Due to conflict, high food prices, and still lingering economic effects of COVID-19's pandemic and climate change, acute hunger rose to impact 258 million people last year. That food security is worsening at a time when we have more access than ever to innovative solutions is unacceptable. It remains our duty to innovate in a way that supports the food and nutrition needs of a growing human population. Because of the efforts of the people here, AIM for Climate partners have increased public and private global investment in climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation to more than $13 billion over 2020 levels. This already exceeds the $10 billion challenge U.S. Special Envoy for Climate Secretary John Kerry set at COP27. And he suggested that we needed to meet that by COP28, so obviously we've gone way past that. And I think this reflects a global appetite to accelerate innovation. We're beginning to see results from these investments. We know when people see what we're doing, more and more will want to contribute. In fact, today we're launching 21 new AIM for Climate innovation sprints, each with a unique focus on a specific agriculture or food system challenge. This brings our total number of innovation sprints to 51 in just 2 years. The sprints, which is an appropriate name for these laser-focused, outcome-oriented collaborations, bring so much opportunity to partners around the world. The sprint do many things, making carbon-neutral irrigation pumps possible for the smallholder farmers in sub-Saharan Africa, delivering climate-smart bean varieties to 3 million farmers, while researching how to better integrate bean and rice crops to prevent pests and diseases, reducing a farmer's need for fertilizer, lowering their water use. Another example is a sprint enabling smallholder farmers to plant 250 million trees by 2025, which not only supports climate adaptation and mitigation, but also boosts farms' income and productivity. These are just a few examples of all the 51 projects that can be found on the AIM for Climate website, aimforclimate.org. We also know that competition spurs innovation. At COP27, I announced the AIM for Climate Grand Challenge, leveraging the power of AI and machine learning, made possible by enterprise neurosystems. The challenge calls for proposals to leverage open source, artificial intelligence, and machine learning to unlock better farming and food production practices. 39 forward thinkers came forward for this challenge, and the finalists are here today. The winners will be announced on Friday morning after they present to a panel of judges, and those chosen will be given additional access and tools to bring their innovative idea to life. So much of why AIM for Climate matters is rooted in its ability to bring bold, creative problem solvers to this work of combating climate challenges. And part of our commitment for AIM for Climate is bringing the financial benefits of climate-smart practices to the farmers, farm workers, producers, and growers on the front lines. Facing the challenges of climate change head-on and building more sustainable, equitable, and resilient food systems means making sure that innovation isn't designed just for those who are able to afford expensive new tools. The fact is that too many farmers here in America and around the world do not profit adequately from farming. We have to reach the small to medium-sized farm holders who need the innovation most of all, and where we will have a significant opportunity to make an effective impact. More efficient fertilizers, advanced information systems, genetic improvements, improved manure management approaches, for example, can improve the economics of farming, enabling us globally to produce more with less. Just last November at COP27, I announced support for several activities necessary to drive practical, economically viable, and innovative solutions, including the Fertilizer Right Initiative. With the Fertilizer Right Initiative, we're working with governments and local organizations worldwide to advance fertilizer efficiency and proper nutrient management. With the initiative, we've already seen significant progress in all 4 of the focus countries: Brazil, Colombia, Pakistan, and Vietnam. And today, I'm pleased to announce the launch of a companion effort, the Efficient Fertilizer Coalition and Consortium. This will be a public-private partnership that advances efficient, environmentally beneficial, and cost-effective fertilizers and management practices through research. Numerous new, innovative fertilizer products are currently available. However, there's too little data about their performance. Farmers need trusted data about what works best for their farm system and climate in order for them to make the best decisions, the right decisions in terms of nutrient management. The Efficient Fertilizer Coalition will address this by funding applied research about novel fertilizers that increase efficiency and reduce direct emissions of nitrous oxide and other greenhouse gases. Also at COP27, I announced that the USDA would invest $5 million in support of the enteric fermentation research and development accelerator, the AIM for Climate Innovation Sprint, led by the Global Methane Hub, to accelerate cost-effective solutions to reduce methane emissions from livestock. Methane emissions from livestock is the 2nd largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from U.S. agriculture and the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions from global agriculture. Today, I'm proud to announce that USDA, through our National Institute of Food and Agriculture, plans to double our investment with an additional $5 million. This will give the scientists involved more power and time to develop cost-effective solutions through the use of feed additives and other strategies. There's also a strong and growing interest in the way our food is produced, creating a major market opportunity for farmers who implement climate-smart agriculture and forestry practices. To that end, USDA is investing more than $3.1 billion for 141 projects to support the production and marketing of climate-smart commodities through USDA's Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities effort. These projects will reach more than 60,000 farmers, encompass more than 25 million acres of working lands engaged in climate-smart production practices like cover crops, no-till and nutrient management, as well as pasture and forestry management. The Partnerships for Climate-Smart Commodities are underpinned by a robust data and learning strategy, which requires grantees to measure the greenhouse gas benefits of their climate-smart practices and to provide quarterly updates on the measuring, monitoring, reporting, and verification of the environmental benefits for air, water, and habitat. We anticipate that these projects will result in more than 60 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent is sequestered over the lives of the projects. This is equivalent to removing about 12 million gas-powered passenger vehicles from the road. To support this effort, will invest resources from President Biden's historic Inflation Reduction Act, which is the most ambitious action in U.S. history to combat the climate crisis and to improve energy security. The Inflation Reduction Act includes nearly $20 billion for USDA to help farmers, ranchers, and forested landowners mitigate agricultural climate impacts by reducing greenhouse gas emissions, increasing carbon storage on their lands, and making operations not only more productive but also more profitable. This historic funding will allow USDA to meet the growing demand for our existing conservation programs, supporting innovation, allowing the measurement and verification of climate benefits, and help farmers build more climate-smart and climate-resilient operations. Unlike in industrial sectors, productivity gains in agriculture are not permanent. Technologies are subject to becoming obsolete as pests and diseases evolve, natural resources degrade, and the climate changes. Significant investment in research, development, and innovation is imperative so we can maintain current productivity levels, enhance sustainable productivity growth, and move forward to address major social and environmental challenges. In aligning our science and research with climate action, I'm proud to announce today as well the release of the 2023-2026 USDA Science and Research Strategy. This strategy outlines USDA's research priorities based on input from internal experts across our department who work on topics from food safety to forestry, and from external stakeholders as well. Over the next 3 years, USDA will advance research that is co-developed with the public, including underserved communities, to address risks from long-term and acute climate stressors. We plan to empower underserved communities by engaging them to tool development and application, and by listening and learning to ensure equitable development and delivery, implementation, and evaluation. We look forward to expanding climate-smart technologies, approaches, and field-based practices to help producers, ranchers, and forested landowners adapt to the consequences of a changing climate. With these goals in mind, at COP27, I announced our intent to launch an international climate hub. And now I'm pleased to announce, based on the success of our domestic climate hubs here at USDA, that today we are in fact launching the International Climate Hub website. This new portal, found at climatehub.usda.gov, will enable science-based, client-informed agricultural decision-making by providing relevant information and resources, especially to producers most vulnerable to the effects of a changing climate. One tool you can find on the International Climate Hub site, and one that I'm particularly proud to share, is the Comet Planner Global tool. Comet Planner Global is a quantification tool that will enable land managers around the world to estimate the current and potential greenhouse gas mitigation and carbon sequestration benefits of common conservation practices. USDA developed this in coordination with Colorado State University and American farmers, and have used this domestic version in America since 2013. In fact, my team has stressed to me that Comet Planner Global is optimized to work on a smartphone, and anyone with access to the internet can use it to zoom in on a geographic region and learn the mitigation benefits of climate-smart practices in a localized way. From new open source tools to regional innovation sprints that have a global impact, so much of AIM for Climate's success comes down to us learning from each other. To mark the road to COP28, I'm pleased that AIM for Climate partners will announce progress on several initiatives this week that will invite future and existing partner engagement. The agenda is packed with announcements and presentations from AIM for Climate partners, coupled with an interactive exhibit hall and exciting tour opportunities. This is truly an event for and by the partners. Today, I look forward to co-hosting with Her Excellency the second AIM for Climate Ministerial to discuss AIM for Climate's progress and vision for the future. This represents the largest convening of agricultural ministers in the United States for a climate change event. And I want to thank all of my colleagues for being here, and I look forward to a productive dialogue. We, all of us, need to work together to meet today's challenges. So I want to conclude by simply indicating that we are excited about the progress that we've seen for AIM for Climate. And part of that progress is in no small measure due to the extraordinary and effective leadership of my co-lead on AIM for Climate, a leader and champion for food security. Please join me now in welcoming Her Excellency Mariam Al-Mahari, Minister of Climate Change and Environment for the United Arab Emirates. Good luck.
Wow, a wonderful good morning to our partners. Secretary Tom Vilsack, thank you so much for all your efforts, and also I have to thank Fatma and Jamie and the whole team, and to all of you as our partners for bringing us to where we are today. If I just think back, it's been 18 months since we launched, and I remember, just to tell you how it all started, when we first spoke to Secretary Vilsack about AIM for C, and we started discussing the idea of creating this global movement, I think at first a lot of people were like, how can a small country in the Middle East, who actually imports most of its food, want to join with a huge country who is an agricultural country and actually push such a global movement? And innovation was key here. And if we are looking back and see where we are today, we can really celebrate the efforts. And thank you to all of you, because it is actually an initiative for you, made by you, for you. And we really thank you for that. I also want to thank former Vice President Gore being here with us. Thank you for blessing us with your presence here today. And I really want to thank the US for being our partner in this important initiative and hosting this summit and the second ministerial. And really, I mean, we know the numbers, we know our food systems are broken, we know there's lots to do on eradicating hunger, there's lots to do on enhancing global food security, and also to slash emissions when it comes to climate change. I think most of you know that a third of global greenhouse gases comes from our broken food systems. So food systems not only have a lot of problems that we have to solve, but they are the solution as well. And so AIM for C, as Secretary Vilsack really explained already in so much detail on what it's about, we're really here to celebrate having more than 500 partners on board, getting $13 billion in investment commitments, and celebrating also the 51 innovation sprints. And I really feel if we look at what's happening this year, I can only say I'm so lucky being a Minister for Climate Change, having also the food security portfolio as a responsibility. This year is a great year to be in my position because we're hosting COP28 and inviting the world, and I'm really making sure that food systems has the attention and center stage that also the energy conversation is having under this umbrella. So I want to thank you all for and I know we've had a lot of consultations with many of you to make sure that at COP28 we come out with something that's really a game changer when it comes to food systems. And AIM for C, or AIM for Climate, is of course going to be a big driver in this global initiative. And I know many of you have been with us in the consultation meetings. They've been going on since UNGA in September. We've had over 10 consultation meetings. And I can proudly say we're at a point now where we're really coming up with a really great framework. And I think you'll all be pleased to know that at the UN, the food system stock-taking moment in July this year, hopefully we'll be able to announce something. And AIM for C will be center in this. So I really want to say that we, as a team, both the US, the UAE, and our partners, have been the driver in this. Now, I just want to reflect a little bit as well on what we're doing in the UAE. We launched a national food security strategy in 2018, and the whole idea being we don't want to just be food secure today, we want to be food secure in the future as well. Being a country that is water scarce, a desert environment, we import most of our foods, how can we change that to reduce our carbon footprint when it comes to our food systems, and also look at the consumer side as well. How can we waste less food? How can we have better nutrition? How can we make sure that the next generation has the skills and the capacity to be able to look at growing food in harsh desert environments? And I think what's great here is that we're seeing innovation sprints today, that we're celebrating today, and then 21 new initiatives, that we have come up with some great systems approach on how we can look at desert farming with new systems approaches. So I really want to say here that I myself, with Secretary Vilsack, we will do everything we can to keep driving this momentum. And I really want to shout out to all of you that it's because of your efforts, it's because of your passion, because of your drive, we are where we are today. There's still a lot of work to do, and I promise you, we will make sure that COP28 will be a game-changer COP for food systems, and we're going to make sure that we can announce even bigger targets by that time. And until then, I wish you all a great 3 days. We're here to work with you, for you, and it's time that we really bend the curve when it comes to food systems. So thank you all for being here with us today.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for those remarks, and Secretary Vilsack. We appreciate both of you, your leadership of Aim for Climate, your dedication and passion to finding solutions for food insecurity and climate change. You inspire us and motivate everyone to be here today. It is now my pleasure to direct your attention to the screens for an Aim for Climate video.
8 billion people share a common address, planet Earth. But external threats like climate change have disrupted our lives, our livelihoods, and our world.
Global hunger,
Climate change,
poverty,
food insecurity and malnutrition.
These are real concerns in need of urgent action.
We've all read the warnings and studies laying out the threat posed by climate change.
Climate crisis is threatening global commitment to end world hunger by 2030.
Climate challenges are really not only food security, they're also security for people.
But to tackle the climate crisis, we must harness the power of innovation to unlock the possibility of multiple solutions for people and planet. The Agriculture Innovation Mission for Climate was founded on this very premise. We work in partnership with our government, knowledge, and innovation sprint partners to drive and accelerate innovations in climate-smart agriculture and across our food systems. Aim for Climate spotlights the research, technologies, and our collective learnings to help us to reach the last mile and to create an equitable and inclusive world where no one is left behind. But this would not have been possible without our partners. We are truly for the partners, by the partners.
I'm inspired to see the global community uniting today.
It's because we care. We see us as responsible global citizens.
Together, we can and must do more
to protect the natural world around us,
to improve and share knowledge,
boost climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation,
to develop crops that are more resilient to plant disease and pests,
to take much less land, much less water, and much less fertilizer to produce the crop,
to reach and educate the poorest, most climate-impacted farmers,
to ensure food security for all,
to fund bold research addressing big food and agriculture challenges,
to enable our agricultural systems to become more sustainable,
come together and share solutions and pledge financial commitments towards agricultural innovation,
and get to solutions that much faster.
The agricultural sector also has a vital role to play. As stewards of the land, our farmers belong on the front lines of the climate fight.
We can do this, and we have no time to lose.
To be a part of Aim for Climate, to be able to bring together the best minds, the best ideas.
In order to really drive forward change.
And produce the goods that humanity needs.
To create a sustainable food system for a better future.
We must continue to work together with our government partners, knowledge partners, and innovation sprint partners. These are accelerated efforts by the private sector, funds, not-for-profits and foundations who have increased their aggregate self-financed investment for bold ideas in climate-smart agriculture and food systems innovation. Together, we have committed to make a difference. Together, we are making unprecedented progress.
We can turn this challenge into a remarkable opportunity.
There's a lot we can do. I invite all of you to join us.
Aim for climate.
Thank you to all of our partners who have provided videos to us over the last couple of years, and special thanks to Natasha Muda, who and her team have at Sterling Global for producing the video. It is my pleasure now to introduce the next portion of the agenda. The next two speakers need very little introduction. Both are leaders for action on climate change and promoting sustainable practices around the world. Please join me in welcoming to the stage former Vice President of the United States, Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and a champion for environmental causes, Al Gore, alongside our co-host, Secretary Vilsack.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning. Well, this is an opportunity I've looked forward to for some time, a chance to visit with you about an issue that you are incredibly passionate about and have provided literally global leadership, unprecedented. I think folks would probably expect me to start globally with you and your and the challenges that you've confronted all of us in terms of the climate, but I'm going to start local. I'm going to make sure people understand that I'm actually talking to Farmer Al today. Farmer Al is a proud farmer in Tennessee. Tell us a little bit about your farming operation. Tell me a little bit about how you see regenerative agriculture playing in your specific operation and why, and how it relates to your passion for climate change.
Well, thank you, Tom. What a great way to start. Thank you, and thank you for this whole gathering. This is like the United Nations of agriculture ministers from all over the world, and dozens. And Minister Al-Mahiri, thank you for your wonderful talk and for being the co-leader of this with Tom Vilsack. And I've got to acknowledge Christy Vilsack, who is right here in the front row, who is First Lady of USDA, and my old colleague Dan Glickman, founding chair of FAR, and he was a predecessor of yours for years. So, Farmer Al, you may have noticed that there are not many calluses on my hands. So I want to be clear on what kind of farming. I do farm, and I have a large team, and I pay very careful attention. I live on my farm. And starting it was a family farm. My parents bought it at the end of World War II, 1945, and I've expanded it since then. And about 10 years ago, started converting it to regenerative agriculture. Of course, no-till, low-till, agroforestry, planted 10,000 trees. Cover crops always keep roots in the soil, diverse cover crops, rotational grazing, cattle, sheep, pigs. Pigs are in a slightly different situation there. We rewilded part of the farm. We produce a lot of vegetables. We serve 75 families on a weekly basis with the consumer-supported agriculture, and we serve restaurants in the Nashville area. We've expanded into some cash crops that you supplement income where you can. We're exploring saffron, mung beans, but the heart of it are vegetables, fruits, and nuts. Chestnuts, we produce a lot of chestnuts for that market. You know, it's in my blood because I was raised half and half, really. My dad was in the Congress, so we were up in this city a lot, but half of each year almost was there, and all summers, and I worked on the farm. The minute school was out, I'd go down to live with a farm manager and until my folks got, back then the Congress wasn't in session all year round. And so it really got in my blood. And really it's the reason I became so interested in the environment, Tom, because my dad and mother were part of the generation that grew up fighting the Dust Bowl consequences, and soil conservation was such a passion. And my dad would teach me lessons about, you know, how to stop a gully before it gets going, and keep your eyes open always, and pay attention to the water. He taught me where to find the best soil. A quick story on that. It was a real exercise. I was about 6 years old, and he finally ended up where he knew he was going, to the best soil. It was black and moist, and kind of embarrassing for me that it took me 50 years before I understood why it was black. That's the carbon. And why it was moist, because the carbon-rich, nutrient-rich soils create these mycorrhizal nets and the other little critters and life forms in the soil. That's where the magic, that's where the act of creation occurs, really. And it holds water better and survives drought and extreme events much better. But that may be more than you wanted, but that's, yeah.
Well, so talk to me a little bit about the role of innovation in your particular farm. As you look at how to farm and what to farm, what innovations have you embraced? What innovations have you seen from your advocacy in terms of climate that you've put into practice on your farm?
Well, we keep up with, and my farm manager, Asher Wright, and the team, we keep up with all of the latest innovations, but innovation sometimes comes slowly. The real innovation is the shift over to regenerative approaches. And we have spent a lot of time, we have postdocs and researchers on the farm. I built a quadplex for them, and they come and spend a lot of time each year on the best ways to measure soil carbon sequestration. In fact, one of the grantees that by the way, congratulations on all the announcements that you and your team put out here. I know how this deal works. Your team has worked and worked and worked and worked to get all this stuff ready for this event. That was one hell of an impressive set of announcements, Tom. Congratulations. And as I said to y'all this morning, Christy, thanks for letting him go back and do this gig a second time around. You may end up with you already have an incredible legacy. Anyway, one of the grantees of one of your programs is the Soil Inventory Project. Bruno Basso from Michigan State, Chris Covey from Skidmore. That really started at my farm. I do every year a conference at the farm called the Climate Underground. And thank you for speaking the last 2 years, Tom. I appreciate it. Soil carbon sequestration is one of the most effective ways to pull carbon out of the sky. And it wasn't until 1970 that agriculture was no longer the principal source of man-made CO2 in the atmosphere. Of course, we went on this incredible bender with fossil fuel burning after World War II, and now we spew 162 million tons every day into the thin blue shell around the planet. You've seen the pictures from space. That thin blue shell is so thin, it's just 5 to 7 kilometers in most places. If you could drive a car at interstate highway speed straight up in the air, you get to the top of that blue line in 5 to 7 minutes, and you couldn't breathe anymore. And below you are all of the greenhouse gas pollutants. And so pulling that out of the atmosphere is job number one. Let me just say, here we are at Agricultural Innovation, all great. I'm 100%, I'm loving what you're doing, but we have to put it in context. The climate crisis is really a fossil fuel crisis. Job number one is to reduce the production and use of fossil fuels and thereby reduce the emissions. Now, the emissions, we can pretend that these preposterously expensive carbon capture things, we're going to catch it all, burn it and then catch it all before it gets up into the sky. It's 0.04% of the air, so you got to filter through 99.96% of the rest, and that's why maybe it'll come down in cost. I hope so. A lot of people are betting big money on it. I hope so, but we can't depend on it. We cannot. The planting trees is a good way to pull some carbon, CO2 out of the atmosphere, but there's 3 times as much carbon in the first meter of topsoil than in all the trees and all the vegetation combined. And if we stop outgassing with agricultural emissions and start in-gassing, start bringing the CO2 back in the soil, that's really the way to, and all those practices I mentioned, which you know so well on regenerative agriculture. Now, if farmers are going to contribute to removing carbon from the atmosphere, they ought to be compensated for it. But compensating farmers for that task really requires getting the measurement systems up to the point where they can't be easily gamed, you know. If we get a degree of reliability and confidence that we can actually measure how much soil carbon is being built up by farmers, we can pay them for that just the same way we see all this frenzy about carbon credits here and there. That's real sequestration. And so the research and innovation that we focus on at Caney Fork Farms, my farm, is to rapidly improve the ways to accurately measure the soil carbon buildup so that then you or maybe one of your successors, if it can't be done right away, can start paying farmers, and other countries, Miriam, can start paying farmers to sequester carbon in their soil.
So what's happening in that space in terms of the ability to measure and quantify? What innovations have you seen that you think we all ought to be looking to and embracing?
Well, there's a lot of innovation. My friend Ratan Lal at Ohio State, great soil scientist, winner of the World Food Prize 3 years ago, and he's been to my farm many times. And he has helped design this. Bruno and Chris, the professors I mentioned earlier, have developed a lightweight, cheap carbon sequestration tool. It's like a 21st century space-age post hole digger that's light enough for a farmer to carry. It's going through trials right now against the very expensive titanium or whatever it is, metal. It's not titanium, but the expensive version. This is just as good, but we're nearly completing the testing of it. You've got to connect with a network of labs. You've got to figure out a way to accurately measure the degree of soil compaction, because that matters a lot when you're measuring CO2. But it's there now, and it is ready for prime time. We have to get these cheap instruments mass produced and set up the legal framework that allows our legislators to contemplate legislation that really formalizes these payments. And we have a bipartisan group of supporters for innovation in agriculture in the Congress, Republicans as well as Democrats. And so I think that getting the science right, the rest of it will flow naturally.
Let's talk a little bit about various technologies. I mean, there's so many aspects to agriculture. One of the concerns, obviously, that's been expressed is the issue of methane, and methane from livestock. What kind of innovations, what kind of suggestions or advice would you give to the livestock industry globally in terms of methane?
Well, we use these small seaweed supplements for our cattle and sheep, and it's still, the research is still maturing, but the first returns are extremely promising.
Does this reduces the amount of methane?
Yeah, definitely, by quite a bit. There are people here who know a lot more about it than I do, but that has been an advantage for sure. And so we use that, and I encourage that, and the research is ongoing.
And what about methane capture in terms of reusing it, capturing the methane and then converting it into energy?
Yes, being done and should be done more. But like a lot of things, and you and I have talked about this, there's so much concentration in agribusiness that ends up a lot of the big guys are able to do that, and getting a version that the smaller farmers can use is still a task undone.
But that's an issue, isn't it? I mean, in terms of the ability to get some of this technology, even if it's relatively inexpensive, not only here in the United States, but globally to smallholder farmers, how we can create the equity in all of this is a challenge. Let's talk a little bit about seed technology. I think that's something you know a little bit about. And in addition to your work as a farmer, you're also an investor as well. Full disclosure, you've got a fund that basically is taking a look at some of the innovations in agriculture. Tell us a little bit about what you see as promising in that space.
Well, first of all, as I told you when I mentioned this privately, I do have a conflict of interest because I'm co-founder and chairman of Generation Investment Management, and we're based in London and San Francisco. My farm is strategically located right in between those two offices. And one of the firms that we've invested in, you had it in that video. Pivot Bio, the former CEO still leading the research there, Karsten Timme, was one of the people who spoke. His successor, I believe, is here. One of your people invited her. And what they do is they have a microbial bath into which the seeds are dunked and thereby inoculated with this microbial culture. And then when they're planted, the plant makes its own nitrogen fertilizer. And the amount saved by farmers in fertilizer costs is enormous, enormous. And of course, it also addresses the problem with eutrophication and the pollution of the groundwater and the dead zones. You know, these dead zones are no joke, and they're spreading out to the deep ocean now. So we got to do something about that for a lot of reasons. But Pivot Bio is a genuinely exciting innovation. They're now, people say, oh, it's another one of these startups. Yes, okay. It's on 7% of the corn acreage in the United States of America today. And they're in test trials in millions of acres and doing lots of different food crops. So again, take it with a grain of salt because I'm an investor and you would expect me to be very positive. But this is one that I think is the real deal.
So seed technology, basically reducing the need for fertilizer. I know also that we're doing some interesting research with sensors, the ability to actually understand and appreciate which acre of ground actually needs fertilizer. How much. Talk a little bit about precision agriculture and what you see.
Yeah, one of the guys I mentioned, Bruno Basso at Michigan State, wears another hat. He has a company called SIBO that I've also invested in. They have used artificial intelligence to process 45 years worth of Landsat data and have segmented it into good rain years, bad rain years, medium rain years, region by region all around the world. And they can tell you the inherent fertility of every field on every farm on the entire planet. And farmers that pay attention to this data can segment those parts of their farms that are just not going to produce well for them no matter what they do, and stop dumping more and more fertilizer on those acres because it's costing them money, it's not earning them very much, and it's causing them a lot of the environmental harm. So that is a way.
Wait a second. You're telling me that there's a technology. Christy and I have our farm in Iowa that I could find out the inherent characteristics of every acre of ground in our farm.
Yes.
From this technology.
We've got it in a 10 meter by 10 meter grid worldwide.
Where does the information come from?
Landsat.
Landsat meaning satellites?
Satellites. The first flight of Landsat was 46 years ago. The sensors have been improved in each subsequent generation. But yes, and I used to use Landsat, Tom, as an example of what I called exformation, all the information that never fires a single neuron in a single human brain. It's just stored in digital silos like grain. But with artificial intelligence, you can now get in there and make it accessible and meaningful to us human beings so we can use it.
Well, how does AI work? I mean, in that context, what does it do?
Well, in this case, in the case of SIBO, the example I was just using, it makes it possible to deal with the incredible volume of information that comes from 45 years of pictures, and you have to select the cloud-free images of every square centimeter of land worldwide, and then match it up to the regional meteorological data. You could hire 1,000 people to do that with pencil and paper. It'd take a long time, but AI is amazing. Now we're using AI in another. We were talking about, if you want me to continue on this.
Yeah.
I've co-founded a coalition of 11 AI organizations, companies, universities, et cetera, that Climate Trace. TRACE stands for Tracking Real-Time Atmospheric Carbon Emissions. And we use continuous data from 300 different satellites. Planet Labs is a good one here in the U.S., Masdar in the European Union. We use South Korean satellites, Chinese Guangdong 6, Brazilian satellite, German satellite separate from the EU. And we take that data from 300 existing satellites every day. We get several complete pictures of the Earth's surface every day, and combine it with 11,100 land, sea, and air-based sensors. We have every ship, every plane, every large emission source of greenhouse gases. Now, why is AI important? With satellites, you can measure methane leaks directly. And there's some satellites doing that now. We use them too. There's some new ones that are going to even be better at that. You cannot measure CO2 emission sources directly from space because the signal to noise ratio looking down through that column of air that's so enriched with CO2, 417 parts per million now, and cars all over the place, and et cetera. But with AI, you can combine your images of the smoke plumes with the infrared measurement of the heat source, with the ripples of water in the cooling pond, the speed of the blades and the cooling fans, the internet data streams that show how much product they're selling, how much electricity, and you put all that into an algorithm, and the term machine learning is used so much these days. And one aspect of machine learning is the more data you feed into it, the more accurate it gets. And in Sharm el-Sheikh at COP27, Secretary General announced to us that we gave our first presentation there. We will have another presentation. We'll go from 72,000 largest sites to the 72 million largest sites this November. We can, and real companies are now using the data. You can go to climatetrace.org, climatetrace.org. It's all free, and there are real companies, a lot of them, that are now using the data to reconfigure their supply chains to get lower carbon steel from electric arc instead of blast furnaces, and there are other improvements they've made, and parts, some parts manufacturers. We have every major emitter in the entire world.
So when we talk about the food system, as we are at Aim for Climate, it's not just the farmer, it's also the processing and the production and transportation,
right,
ultimately getting it to the retailer. So you're telling me that eventually we're going to have the ability to say within that supply chain who's contributing what in terms of greenhouse gas emissions because of this capacity to track?
We have that ability today. It is not, it is just beginning to be widely used. And it improves every week. The increase in the accuracy is really phenomenal.
So when you combine the ability to understand the fertility of your soil,
yes,
with the ability to trace or to calculate emissions, essentially you create that kind of database that markets will now value and farmers can essentially say, by virtue of my practices, I'm confident that I'm doing X on my farm, and it's resulting in a particular conservation benefit that a market will pay for.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the future.
And circling it back to the soil carbon, you cannot see, as far as I know anyway, you cannot see the carbon sequestered in the soil from space, of course. I say of course because they surprise me every year doing new stuff. But when we perfect this soil carbon sampling, then that lays the basis for farmers to be able to get an extra source of income from the soil carbon sequestration that will provide another incentive for them to switch over to the regenerative agriculture. You know, just doubling down on more and more synthetic nitrogen fertilizer, 90% of it is natural gas, more eutrophication, more pollution. You know, we can't keep doing this, and the farmers it's too expensive. You know, we've got to, anyway, we have got to change this. And another reason is, you remember, when was it, 3-4 years ago, where they had that huge flood down, the rain bombs that the climate crisis causes in the flooding. Something like 20 million acres couldn't be planted in Iowa and other parts of the Midwest. The 675,000 acres that they found were able to replant were by and large the ones managed with regenerative approaches, because it makes the farms more resilient. So what's not to like? The farmer gets more resilience to these increasingly frequent and severe extreme weather events, potentially a new source of income from the soil carbon sequestration. And over time, these yields are really coming up with regenerative agriculture, and you save your expenses on input costs too.
Talk to me for just a few minutes about the role of renewable energy production on the farm, and whether you see innovation in that space that could make a difference.
Well, you've probably seen the pictures of farmers in Iowa with windmills in their pastures, and solar is growing very, very quickly as well. You know, I guess some people still resist it, but good Lord, you know, there's no pollution. It's the cheapest source of electricity. The IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, had a report last year on the most effective solutions to the climate crisis. I'm going to give you the top 4. Nuclear's not on it. I hope they have some breakthrough there. Carbon capture and sequestration, you know, I hope so, but I'm not going to hold my breath, etc. Number 1 solution was solar. More solar. The second solution, ranked in order, was to halt the destruction of wild areas and forest lands, which now serve as carbon sinks. And you know, 70 to 90% of the increased cropland, these are new figures, is coming from the invasion into rainforest and protected areas. Stopping that is on the agriculture agenda also. The number 3 source was wind. It has come down nearly as fast in price for electricity as solar. And the 4th, out of all the solutions, the 4th in line is soil carbon sequestration through agriculture. So 2 of the top 4 solutions to the climate crisis are relevant to agriculture. Stop the destruction of wild areas that are now sequestering carbon with the expansion of cropland. Let's use innovation and other techniques to get our yields up and not tear down the Amazon, and I'm hopeful President Lula is going to follow through with his commitments there, and then get in gear on the sequestration of soil carbon. You know, Ratan Lal, who got a spontaneous round of applause here earlier, he has a study, peer-reviewed study with co-authors, saying that the technical potential, which is kind of a phrase of art, the technical potential for putting soil carbon back in the ground is enormous, almost the entire delta, the entire difference from pre-industrial era. Now, that'll never happen, but if we can manage the politics and the bureaucracies, and all these ministers are here and you're the ones to do it, and put in place a nationwide and a worldwide system to incentivize farmers to use these techniques to sequester soil carbon, then that is the single best way. 1 trillion trees, okay, I'm for that, but there are a lot of questions. We have to sort it out. But soil carbon sequestration through regenerative agriculture is the best way to pull CO2 out of the atmosphere.
So we've got this time's gone by way too quickly. I've got just so many questions here.
One other point before I let you go. We have not yet raised the issue you raised the issue of equity. Black farmers, indigenous farmers, low-income farmers, they need access to this innovation as well. My neighbor in Kentucky, Jim Embry, has been a big leader on this. And so we need to loop them into this as well. I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, that's okay. Our Climate Smart Commodities Initiative actually has large-scale grants and also smaller-scale grants, and we had as a factor figuring out ways in which underserved producers could be impacted and affected and involved in all of our projects, and we're excited about that opportunity. But you're absolutely right. That's part of the big challenge here. You can talk about innovation, but getting it to a point where it actually helps that smallholder farmer, that person who doesn't necessarily can't afford the latest bell and whistle. How do you actually get it to a point where it impacts their operation? Talk to me, let's go down the line. Responsibilities and duties and the role. You mentioned government basically providing the incentives. Talk to me about agribusiness. What role do you see they need to play, that they need to play more, do less?
Well, I think they are moving. That's my impression. There are others who would disagree with that, but my impression is that they're moving. Of course, we have a big problem with concentration in agriculture, monopolies, and you don't hear much about monopsonies, or oligopolies and oligopsonies. The tyranny of the single buyer is as bad as the tyranny of the single seller, and farmers are caught in between. And I think the big ag companies are increasingly aware of that, and certainly they're aware that they can play a role in helping to solve the climate crisis. Now I think, we get dependent on these herbicides, insecticides, and fungicides. Fungal outbreaks, by the way, that's another big new source. These plant diseases are supercharged by the climate crisis, both the elevated temperature, all that greenhouse gas pollution that I mentioned earlier. It traps as much heat every day as would be released by 600,000 Hiroshima-class atomic bombs exploding on the Earth every 24 hours. It's hard for me to wrap my mind around a number that big, but that's the reason, that's what's happening. And all of the food crops that we depend upon today, we're told were patiently selected by Neolithic women 10, 15,000 years ago, 100 generations, and they came up with what we still depend upon. But those plants, when they were developed in a temperature envelope that's different from what we're creating now. And the spread of plant fungus diseases is really a problem. The bacteria, the pests, et cetera. Big ag can help us in dealing with that, but it's not always looking for more sides, more ways to kill these critters, because they end up killing the good stuff as well as the bad stuff. And so regenerative agriculture builds in not only resilience to these extreme events, but microbial communities in the soil that confer resistance in the crops themselves. So some of the big ag companies, I think, probably have some interests that are in conflict with that, but most of them, I think, are beginning to move in the right direction.
So time is almost up. I'm just going to take the privilege to two more questions. One, the role of the consumer in all of this, and two, Are you hopeful and optimistic about the future, or are you deeply concerned about it, or both?
Yeah. First of all, the role of the consumer. I've only been in the business world for 23 years. Since I left the White House involuntarily. Well, you know, you win some and you lose some, then there's that little known third category. But one of the things I've learned in the business world is that the difference between profit and loss is most often found right at a very thin margin. And the same is true in responding to consumer demand. And even if it's only a single-digit fraction of a percentage of the customers who are saying, look, I want regeneratively grown products. Organic, the label got kind of messed up, you know, and we need to sort all that out. We don't have time for that here. But more and more consumers are paying careful attention. And even if it's a small percentage, that can affect the margin between profit and loss. And so consumers who demand healthier foods grown in a healthier, more responsible way are helping to drive the change we need. Now, am I optimistic or pessimistic? You know the old joke about the difference between an optimist and a pessimist. The pessimist said, you know, I just don't see how things could be any worse. And the optimist said, oh, I think I can. But I choose to be a genuine optimist, Tom. We have, you know, in all candor, we have already caused some serious damage. And regrettably, some of the damage we've already caused is not reversible. The ice melting process has been triggered now. We can slow it down. We may be able to mitigate that, but we're just going to have an orderly retreat at some point in the future from these coastal areas. And we're a coastal species, so it's going to be difficult. But we can deal with what we have caused so far. We cannot deal with what the scientists tell us is coming if we don't stop using that thin blue troposphere as an open sewer. We are now telling the oil and gas producers and all of the other big emitters, oh, you've got a lot of gaseous pollution that traps heat? No problem. Just dump it into the sky. We don't care. We don't charge you anything for it. Just feel free to just spew all the stuff up there you want to. We've got to stop that. We have got to stop that. And we've got to stop pretending that there's going to be some magical technological solution. We've got to obey the first law of holes. When you're in one, stop digging. And that's job number one. But what I have seen around the world, and particularly, Tom, with your leadership here at USDA and President Biden's leadership, one of the things I learned in a quarter century of elective office is the presidency is a team sport. And the team that President Biden has put together may be the finest team ever to be. Now, Dan, you and I were in another team, and I don't want to slight us, but this may be the finest team, person for person across the board, that has ever governed this country. And the IRA, the climate provisions of the bipartisan infrastructure law, climate provisions of the CHIPS Act, you put all those together, it's probably going to mean more than $1 trillion into climate solutions. And now, thank goodness, Europe and some of the other regions are saying, well, they moaned about the WTO implications and all of that, but they finally begun to come to the conclusion, we got to match it. So a race to the top is now emerging. We have seen, what percentage of the new electricity production installed worldwide last year was solar and wind? I'm not going to, it's not a trick question. The answer is 90% in India, 93% of all the new electricity generation was solar and wind last year. And the cost is still coming down. We're seeing advances on every front, but it is a race. It is a race. We've got everything we need. The IEA, the International Energy Agency, and the IPCC say that we have all the technologies we need right now to reduce emissions 50% by 2030, and proven deployment models. We have everything we need, except perhaps sufficient political will. Now, I'm optimistic because I know that political will is itself a renewable resource.
Well, I'm optimistic because I think agriculture understands and appreciates perhaps more on a day-to-day basis than just about any other industry. The farmers and ranchers and producers around the world see this and the impact every single day. I think they're committed to this, and I think what we need to be able to do is to provide the tools, the information, the data, the resources for them to embrace regenerative practices, to embrace new technologies and innovation, and to make sure that it's available across the board, not just to a few, but to the many and most. And we're certainly committed to that, and I think Aim for Climate is really designed to try to accelerate the development of that innovation, and then it's up to us to make sure that it's widespread. So with that, please join me in thanking the former Vice President and climate advocate, Al Gore.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Welcome, everyone, to our lunch plenary session. We have an exciting lineup of speakers ahead. It is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Sam Kass. As the former White House chef and senior policy advisor for nutrition under U.S. President Barack Obama, Mr. Kass played a key role in shaping national food policy and promoting initiatives such as the Let's Move campaign to combat childhood obesity. He has received numerous awards for his work, and he is a partner at Acre Venture Partners. Today, Mr. Kass will lead us through a culinary journey into the future of food. Please join me in welcoming Sam Kass.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? Good? It's a real honor to be here today. Jamie, thank you for all of your incredible work to put this together. I would especially like to thank and acknowledge Secretary Vilsack, who I had the privilege of working with for many, many years. Sir, your leadership has been stunning, just absolutely unbelievable. I've been floored by how much you've gotten done, and we're very happy that you're back in the driver's seat. I hope you don't go and hope you get another turn. You can't leave if we do. Also, Your Excellency, I've been hearing of your work for many, many years. You're having an impact that's going around the globe, and so I just thank you for your leadership thus far, and I know what you're going to do in the future. So if we could please acknowledge these leaders for bringing us here together today. So I'm from Chicago, and those of you not from here, Chicago is cold. And we keep hearing about, 2 degrees, 2-degree threshold. We can't tip over 2 degrees. Now, people back home, when they hear that, they're like, that sounds kind of good. 2 degrees, let's warm it up a little bit. It's cold here. We have failed to fully communicate and connect these issues and what's at stake when it comes to tackling this crisis. So with that, I welcome you to the Last Supper, or I guess I should say, in this case, the last lunch. So today's menu is been put together with, of course, the work of a very large team of chefs who worked very hard to put this meal together, to highlighting ingredients that experts predict will not be around for our kids and our grandkids because of climate. Now, it turns out, and I've been doing these for a little while, that some of these ingredients might actually not be around in our lifetimes. Let's start with our morning. Raise your hand if you had a cup of coffee today. That's what I thought. For me, like, there is basically no life without coffee. But coffee, like many perennial crops, needs a very stable climate. And currently, 75 out of the 124 wild varieties of coffee are in threat to go extinct right now, not sometime in 2050 or 2070, right now. The IDB estimates that with rising temperatures, the area for suitable coffee production is going to decrease by 50% in 2050. So by the time we get to all the pledges we've made, we've already lost half the arable land for coffee. The two main varieties of coffee that we drink tend to be grown in the valleys in mountainous regions. Coffee producers now already in many parts of the world are having to plant their trees up the sides of mountains because right now it is already too hot where they've been traditionally planted. And in places like Hawaii, they're already out of room. There's nowhere up the mountain to go. In the salad that you're currently enjoying, the chickpeas, which are a primary source of food and protein for about 20% of the world's population, and a particularly important one for many low-income communities and countries, is now facing significant pressure. Extreme temperatures and droughts are putting the pressure that estimates that we could lose about 60% of the chickpea crop in the coming decades. Last year alone, we saw a 20% decline in chickpea yields from drought and conflict. The honey that your dressing is made is also in severe threat. I think we know about the plight of bees. It's not any one issue, it's habitat and disease and the rest, but climate change is exacerbating all of that, and as we know, without pollinators and without bees, so much of our food system starts to crumble. So when we get to your main, and I know you don't know what your main is, but when you do, I'll tell you a few things about your main course. So you'll have barley on the plate. And barley too, like many other grains, like wheat and rice, and many grains that the world really relies on for the basis of their diet, are facing steep declines in the future due to these extreme weather events and drought. And this is particularly concerning given how much of the core diet it makes up for the most vulnerable countries and nations around the country. The main course is a rockfish. It's a local rockfish. Now, when this was suggested, I actually didn't think there was any issues with rockfish. I was like, I kind of need a different fish, like salmon maybe would tell my story better. But it turns out rockfish too are now facing serious pressure. The migration patterns and overall stock of rockfish are being significantly disrupted right now due to climate. These warming waters and lower levels of oxygen are affecting the spawning rates and cycles. And we're seeing declines starting to really set in for rockfish populations. Now, the conditions are not dissimilar to other species like salmon, where some populations we've seen full-on collapse of certain kinds of salmon because of these same challenges that those fish are facing. Our oceans are absorbing about 1/4 of what we're putting into the atmosphere. And as the oceans are absorbing that carbon, it's making the oceans more acidic. You guys know these issues probably better than me. So in your main course, the sauce that will be on that chef put on the fish is made from shrimp. And shrimp, like all crustaceans, so throw in crab and lobsters, are at severe risk because the shells of the baby crustaceans cannot form because of the acidity in the waters. This is also true for shellfish, so add scallops and mussels and clams. And these kind of foods make up the basis of a food chain for fish like rockfish and salmon and so many other species. So the ripple effect that this is starting to have on our oceans is severe. To give another example, just to give you a sense of how quickly things can change, in the Pacific Northwest, last year officials were forced to cancel the snow crab season for the first time in the history of the fishery. We went from 11.7 billion crabs in 2018 to 1.9 billion last year, 2022. That's an 80% decline in 4 years. Stop and think about that for a minute. They don't know genuinely what is going to happen next year, whether there will be crabs to harvest. Now, we're not drinking wine, but I can't have this discussion without talking about wine. Because yes, it's wine too. Wine needs a very stable climate. And we're seeing significant pressure already in wine regions around the country. They need warm days, cool nights, and it's changing so rapidly that growers in Champagne are starting to buy land in England because they don't know if they're going to be able to produce a consistent crop of Champagne. Now, you know it's bad when the French think that their only shot is to make wine in England. So things are getting pretty serious out there. So now on to your dessert. And I'm sorry to add this one to your list, but yes, chocolate too. Chocolate too. So you're going to have a chocolate tart, and that tart will no longer be around, or if it is around, it will be only for the wealthiest among us who will be able to afford it. In the coming decades, everywhere where we grow chocolate will no longer be hospitable to that crop. Those trees will have to start migrating to find conditions that are suitable. And notice, trees don't have legs. And the implications for those communities, the massive disruptions, the economic upheaval, the cultural upheaval is severe. So served with that will also be pistachios and almonds. Those two are under, like many nuts, are also facing a similar plight to chocolate. So wine, coffee, chocolate. Do we need any more reason to not double down on our efforts? I think we're going to be having to get much more serious when it comes to solving these challenges if we are going to produce the change we need. So when you look at your meal, when you look down at your plate, please consider that many of these things are not going to be here for our kids. Please consider that when we're talking about all these issues, what we're really talking about is our very way of life is at stake. Our very identities, our culture, who we understand ourselves to be is at stake. Communities and livelihoods, people's entire ways of life, how they feed themselves and their families is at stake. And I'm the father of a 5- and a 4-year-old, and our ability to pass down what we were given, that fundamental relationship between parent and child, that is at stake. So I think we take this understanding of really what we're talking about here and put it into 3 key areas of action. One, as you heard today, we have to continue to make much more progress on reducing the negative impact that our system is currently having on the environment. We know food and ag is the #2 driver of emissions, #1 driver of deforestation and water use. We have a lot of work to do to minimize the impact of the system on the environment. Secondly, as you heard a lot discussed today, we have to do more to prepare ourselves to adapt to this changing climate. Our food system was designed and built in the most stable climate that we can really record on record. And now we're going to be in a much more volatile, resource-constrained world trying to solve these challenges and feed a much significantly growing population. And third, and you heard a lot about this today from Vice President Gore and Secretary Vilsack, but there's an opportunity to unlock the potential of regenerative agriculture and sequester amounts of carbon that is a once-in-a-lifetime chance. And I believe that with some of the technologies that I'm working on and seeing, I think we can transform and solve some of the biggest challenges we have in a way that we've not seen before. So I wake up every day with the duality of looking at my plate and feeling this deep urgency of the moment, while at the same time feeling like, because of gatherings like this, because of Aim for C and other efforts around the country, and the possibility for ag and food systems to solve these challenges within the time horizon that the science says we have, that I have real, genuine hope that this is a once-in-a-lifetime moment for us to capture. Now, I'll leave you with this, which is we do have to move forward with a much greater sense of urgency. We have to take on much more risk. If you sit in office, it means going back and saying, we're going to push hard on a bill we thought was maybe politically too risky. I hope in business, if you go back to your office, you say, I'm going to spend 2-3 times more of my budget on these issues and cut the time horizon I've given my teams in half. We have to decide to move faster because we are simply out of time. We are simply out of time. These next couple of years really matter. So I want to thank everybody who's here for your ongoing dedication and commitment to these issues. I know it's hard work. I know sometimes it's thankless, but we are working to provide the nourishment and food security, not just for today, but for generations ahead. So thank you, and look forward to working on these for many more years to come. Now it's my honor to invite up with me Diane Holdorf, who helps lead, please come up, Diane, who leads the World Business Council for Sustainable Development and is pushing to work with industry to make progress unlike any organization that I've seen in the world, and I'm so excited for all that you guys are doing. Please welcome Diane to the stage.
Good job. Sam, you always do a really remarkable job of making it very, very real. And the fact that you could design what we're all eating here today and bring our attention to what will change because of what you've designed into the menu, I think puts such an important point on why we've actually all showed up and made the commitment to support this. You've moved from designing plates to investing in innovation. Are you taking what you've learned into making that shift?
Yeah, I think keeping really what's most important, which is ultimately what ends up on our plates, and in finding the tools and technologies and innovations that I think are going to really empower the whole system every step of the way, from producers to make the economics work for them, down through the supply chain for manufacturers. We're seeing technology innovations across the whole landscape that I do believe are going to shift the ball and really, hopefully in the next few years, feel like we're in a whole new paradigm.
Yeah.
So what's making you hopeful in this?
Well, the focus that we have here on the role of innovation, actually the role of agriculture in being a solution, to me is game-changing. We've started to have a completely different conversation around what agriculture can contribute, not just the risks that we're facing. So building these bridges into what's the enabling environment, what's the policy needed, what's the investment models, and what's business leading to deliver, for me actually gives me tremendous hope.
Well, I know you have some really, some of the people who are leading the way, so I will turn it over to you. Thank you guys so much.
Great, thanks again,
Thank
Sam.
You.
So I know when this was being imagined, there was a vision for bringing over 1,000 people together in a key drumbeat moment between the US and the UAE into COP28. And I'd like to really sincerely thank again Secretary Vilsack and Her Excellency Almira and their teams for creating this space where we can look at the role of agriculture, innovation, and investment to drive the outcomes that we want to see. The announcements that you made this morning, Secretary Vilsack, $13 billion already invested, often co-invested, co-designed, 21 new innovation sprints. These are big accelerator moments. And they don't happen just because of one government, two governments in this case. It really happens because everybody who's here leans in and builds the bridges across the stakeholders for what it is that we need to accomplish. As WBCSD, we're really excited to be able to help mobilize the business, the private sector, the non-state actors into delivering what we have to achieve at this COP. It's an amazing moment in time to see food brought to the agenda on the climate transformation, as we know the UAE will lead in on energy as well. To have both of these systems front and center will really change the global debate, the global action on what it is that we need to achieve. And we always look at ourselves as business as what's the role that we do in setting out the agenda? How do we lead by example? And what's the work that has to be done to funnel that money all the way back to the land? And while we don't necessarily have the farmers here on stage with us today, the indigenous communities here on stage with us today, the rural communities who sit at the heart of driving these transformations, the value chains that we connect are what will bring that action together to the ground, making that investment count where it's most needed. We're going to be lifting this landscape approach, this value chain approach, into what solutions look like for action at this COP through into the 2025 goals to help deliver also on the SDGs. So we're in this together, leading it for the long haul. With that, I'd like to invite 4 leading companies onto the stage. We've got a great group of CEOs joining us to speak about what this collective action really looks like and how we make that movement count towards delivering 1.5. With this, if I can please invite our panel to the stage. Roman Lagarda from PepsiCo, Juan Luciano from ADM, Julia Collins from Planet Forward, and Sarah Menker with Grow Intelligence. Please come up and join us. So coming together here, we have big global companies, we have innovators and startups, we have those focused on commodities, those focused on data and technology. And it's by design, because we have to have this whole collaborative action pulled together to be able to make the changes that we need. So I'm quite excited to have a starting conversation around why this collective action really matters. So, Ramon, I'm going to come to you first. We've got a partnership already up here on stage with PepsiCo and ADM and actually Planet Forward as well. It's leveraging the power of the USDA and IRA investments into creating actions and results. Can you tell us a little bit about why it's so important to PepsiCo to focus on regenerative solutions in agriculture and why PepsiCo leaned into this kind of partnership?
Yeah, for sure. So good afternoon, everybody. I hope you guys are enjoying your lunch. It's great to be around this group of people so knowledgeable on this theme. For us, PepsiCo, we are a large food company. We are one of the largest food companies in the world. We source about 20 crops in 50 countries around the world. So it goes from oats, tomatoes, oranges, potatoes, basically everything you can think of. So for us to have a successful company 20 years from now, we need to ensure that we have resilient agriculture and we can source our ingredients all around the world in the way that Sam was saying, stable and sustainable. So agriculture is critical for the success of the company. And as we think about agriculture and resilient agriculture, we're thinking about obviously new practices, regenerative new practices that will make our agriculture sustainable. Now, it is part of the holistic transformation of the company. There's one pillar that we call positive agriculture that we're investing a lot of money. Can we do it all ourselves? For sure not. There is a big, I think we have to act on two key actors on the food system. One is the farmer. I guess we'll talk a lot about the farmer, but I would like to put the consumer out there as well as the other actor that we need to influence. And we have the luxury, if you want, to go all the way from the farmer to the consumer, connecting those two key actors. So we have a responsibility to transform how consumers make decisions in their brands. And I think we have to talk about, and we'll talk later probably about information, how we provide information to the consumers. On the farmer side, we see there are financial constraints, there are technical constraints, there are social limitations that we need to act upon as a group with our partners to change their behavior. So that's why we are very focused on reg agriculture for the future of our company. And we need those partners like here Juan and his company, ADM. We're doing amazing things together. We're really innovating as partners. And I would say we were not thinking about partnerships the way we are today, because the problems to solve are much bigger. And sometimes you need to break some of the comfort zones of the organization to go broader and innovate in financial models or technical models or social innovation in this case.
So PepsiCo has implemented a focus on agriculture and regenerative agriculture, not just into its business strategy, which is already a huge change, but into the way it engages across its partnerships and its business actions.
Exactly. I think for us to be a resilient company, a successful company, we need to start from our brands, the way our brands connect with farmers. And we have brands like Lay's that are putting the farmers at the center of the debate. And obviously we need to partner with our, in this case, ADM, which is one of our key suppliers across multiple crops, and how we're thinking about transforming the farmer, joining forces, technology-wise, financial, sharing risks on the transformation, and then obviously with the help of the government, wherever we can, right?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think it's a great example of what leadership looks like and what investment really looks like. And Juan, with that, let me turn it to you, because ADM is also investing significantly into regenerative agriculture and the types of supply chain shifts that need to be taking on, as Ramon was saying, new and unusual partnerships. Tell us a little bit about where you're doing this, obviously here in the US, but in other really important parts of the world like Latin America. How important are the partnerships for you there to really maximize the climate agenda within ADM?
Yeah, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Hope you can hear me well. I think as Ramon was saying, for a company like ADM, ADM probably is the largest, longest tenure Fortune 50 company you don't know much about. So we're about $100 billion in revenue, 120 years young, and we sit in the middle between the farm gate and the consumers. So being present, as Diane was saying, in 160 countries, we have the unique position, the unique opportunity and responsibility to influence and make positive impact at scale. That's why this is so important to us. Sometimes in our fight on climate change, we have concentrated too much in what we need to remove, and not that much in what we can bring to the table from restorative properties in which we can bring those ecosystems back. Yeah. Because the important thing here is to protect water, to protect biodiversity, to bring resiliency to farmers. So farmers have had always this symbiotic relationship with the land. They understand, a little bit like ADM, understand the value of that. But sometimes we need the enablers, or maybe more than enablers, a little bit of a nudge, you know, to give them the proper incentive to do that. I think it's a lot of groundwork. ADM, we procure about a little bit over 10% of all the crops in the world. We have relationship with 200,000 farmers in the world. That's a lot of groundwork. That's a lot of town halls that you need to go and explain that. And then we need to put together the incentives, whether it's with climate smart agriculture or what we're doing with Ramon here in Pepsi, or the agreements that we have in Brazil. I would say the most important thing, and that's why the partnership with Ramon works, but sometimes we struggle in places like Brazil, is we can generate the supply of sustainable grown products, but we need to match it with the demand. The farmer is counting that it's going to have this extra cost, extra practices, but it's going to be the demand. So that's why being in a partnership with a powerhouse, a brand powerhouse like Pepsi helps, but in places like Brazil and others, we need to bring the demand up to match this.
Yeah, I think you raised a really important point about these demand signals and how we also are funding the transition for farmers. Because the outcomes that we're seeking are beneficial, obviously, at a farm level, but there's still a transition that's required.
Yeah.
And so it takes a whole different level of innovation and thinking about funding solutions to be able to move that forward. So thank you for sharing some of those examples. You know, what both ADM and PepsiCo also have that you haven't highlighted so much is very clear climate target commitments. All of this work in agriculture is a key piece in doing that. And as I reflect on our audience, many, while countries have nationally determined contributions to helping deliver the Paris Agreement, companies have to be delivering in this as well. And so getting to the data, the climate data at the farm level that builds on, Ramon and Juan, what you were just saying, is key. We have to demonstrate that as well. And Julia, that's a large part of what Plan Forward is doing, is helping to enable the real technical accounting and data solutions that allow companies to demonstrate where this Scope 3 impact is happening. I know you've got partnerships here. Tell us about what's driving that as under your business leadership.
Yeah, at Planet Forward, we truly do believe that the urgency of climate change demands that we employ really high quality.
I'm sorry, I'm going to stop you, Julia. I know that it's wonderful to be able to sit together at lunch, but it's a little hard to hear ourselves up here. So if I can ask everybody, please be respectful of the panel. We'll continue our conversation here. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you.
Julia, back to you.
Yes, of course, we were talking about the importance of data integrity. And at Planet Forward, we truly do believe that the urgency of climate change demands that we employ very high quality solutions. And ultimately, as a private sector company, we also believe that the market will ultimately reward us for employing a high degree of scientific rigor. And at the same time, given the speed and scale with which we need to decarbonize these Scope 3 or these global supply chains, we've got to build tools that are easy to understand and easy to use. And so that is why Planet Forward is a software company. We leverage a data technology that's under a software that is truly easy to use for everyday folks who are doing this climate work within their organizations, right? So we do full corporate greenhouse gas inventories. We do detailed Scope 3 decarbonization strategies and are so excited by the work of the WBCSD in Scope 3. We do everything from measuring the head office all the way down to a head of lettuce, because frankly, in our business, every detail truly matters. And I will also say that when you're doing this carbon measurement, the math really does matter. I am an unapologetic math nerd. I think I have like a membership card to the Global Society of Math Nerds. And for all the math nerds in the house, I know you're with me. But at Planet Forward, we really do believe that the methodology and the data is critically important, right? Because when you are measuring that head office or you are measuring that head of lettuce, the integrity of your data is the difference between having a number that you really don't know what to do anything with, to understanding where your carbon is coming from so that you can actually understand how to mitigate it, right? Because as much as we all get excited about very good measurement, what we are all really here to do is to facilitate decarbonization.
Absolutely.
Right? And so when we look at organizations like ADM, organizations like PepsiCo, who have made massive investments in regenerative agriculture, what Planet Forward wants to do is to help them to quantify the impact of those investments and also be laser focused about where there are additional opportunities. And so that's a bit about how we're working already with ADM and hope to be working with organizations like PepsiCo in the future. I'll sort of close by saying this last piece, which is that, innovation has really been the through line of this morning's conversation, right? And why would a massive organization like ADM work with a startup? And it really is because large agribusinesses are in a unique position to fuel innovation. We often talk about the importance of investing, and yes, we absolutely love venture capital as a catalytic capital instrument for climate action. But we also need novel go-to-market strategies, novel product development, novel ways to message climate impact to consumers. And agribusinesses, whether you're working with farmers or bringing that story through to the end customer, are so well positioned. We heard it from Her Excellency, we heard it from the former Vice President, we heard it from Secretary Vilsack, we heard it from Sam Cass. This really now is the moment to leverage the power of global food systems to be able to get to net zero.
Absolutely. And when we've spoken a lot about the innovations and the innovation sprints that have come together
Diane,
and will
one
accelerate.
second. I'm sorry, I've been asked to come. Hey guys, these are some of the leading people in the world trying to move these issues forward. And just out of respect and love for their work, can we just please, for a few more minutes, keep it down so we can hear what they have to say, and we'll be able to get back to conversations in a minute. So all the way in the back, it would be great if you guys could just take a minute to just stop the conversations. They're going to be done in just a few minutes, okay? Thank you.
Sam, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. So bringing us back into innovation, which is a big focus of what we're doing. Julia, you just laid out ways of thinking about agriculture, technology, solutions, and innovations that are really cutting edge of how we will drive the transformation forward. We need this type of innovation, not just at the farm level, as to be able to drive the solutions. Now, the methodologies, the math only works based on the quality of the data that we have. So with that, Sarah, I'm going to come to you because Grow Intelligence is another critical component to tracking this data from the farm all the way back to delivering the types of climate commitments and climate action that we're talking about here. Tell us more about what that role of data really means in the work that you're leading.
Yeah, and data for the sake of data doesn't make it good. So the quality of the data has to be good, right? It's garbage in, sort of garbage out. But in terms of sort of both addressing challenges around food security as well as our ability to both be resilient to climate change as well as prioritizing sort of what needs to be done on the mitigation strategy, data plays a very big role in being able to prioritize. So if we take a policy-based lens, there's both I think a mitigation conversation that's happening, but there's also a massive conversation that's starting to emerge around adaptation, which for a lot of sort of emerging economies is the bigger challenge, right? So if you think of emissions and global emissions today, 26 countries are responsible for 83% of global emissions. Last I checked, the number of countries we have in the world is a lot greater than that. And so that sort of last 17% are also the countries that are going to be disproportionately affected by climate change. And so emitters are not necessarily the ones being affected. And so the role that data plays in all this is, one, is if you understand what growing patterns were, so if we sort of look at historical data, and then you look at sort of projections and you look at sort of the climate projections, and the science has gotten very good for us to get a better understanding of where are we headed under different carbon pathways. How do we prioritize where funding goes, and how do we prioritize, everything from the repurposing of sort of physical assets and buildings to if, a large company like PepsiCo needs to think of the resilience of its sort of supply chain. The first question is, how does land suitability shift over time under different climate scenarios? And then how do I target and how do I build the right types of processing facilities and supply chains for the next 20 years out? These are multi-billion-dollar investments that need to be made, and data plays a really critical role in it. And we're sort of, I think as a world, at sort of the cusp of some magic happening with the data, right? Like when we started to Grow 9 years ago, it was almost this very obscure thing where working on climate and food security both were very sort of obscure topics. They're now very obvious challenges for the world. But also what's happening in sort of the world of AI really can let us use the best of data to essentially drive decisions and make changes in a prioritized manner. Because I will say the one thing that becomes very overwhelming about the climate discussion is oftentimes like, where do I even begin? Right? If something seems completely overwhelming and something seems like you can't take action on it, then how do you prioritize? And data really does help that prioritization, both from a policy implementation standpoint as well as sort of from a company investment standpoint. And I think both are going to be absolutely critical.
Absolutely, and we heard a lot about that actually from Vice President Gore when he was up here, about this tipping point moment that we're at where the action and the finance and the methodologies and the data are all coming together at a level of specificity that can actually drive the tremendous shift that we know that needs to happen. And mobilizing all of this into COP28 this year is a moment for us to continue to shine the spotlight, building on this incredible Aim for Climate Summit. But let's talk a little bit more about how that data is business relevant. And then we'll come back around into why public-private partnership is so important, like some of the examples we've shared, to accelerate it. And maybe I can come back to you, Ramon, first on this point of the role of data in decision-making and how that guides the types of partnerships that you move into.
Yeah, I would say data is critical, but we cannot use data as an excuse not to make progress either, right? So what I tell investors, or I tell some of the people in my teams, is that I think there's enough science that tells us that if we move to regenerative agriculture, we're going to have better land. That land is going to sequester CO2. Those farmers will be more resilient. Eventually, their P&L will be better. So I think there's enough science so that we don't have to wait for perfect data, so we can make a lot of progress. However, data will be critical for us to make the right decisions to help farmers become more precise in a lot of the nutrition management or irrigation or some of the practices that would eventually drive transformation. I think we need to create some mechanism for carbon markets somehow. I think there is a lot of opportunity in creating financial incentives for that money to go to the farmers and create tipping points at scale. And that's where we're going to need good data, credible data that you make an investment and you trust that product that you buy. And so there is value in that. Companies like ours, we are being held accountable, and rightly so, to make progress, proof progress to each one of our stakeholders. And we have to have reliable data that helps us show the progress and be accountable for it. So data is critical in many respects, but I would like to say there is enough data, there is enough science already that leading companies, early adopters in the farming system, early adopters in the full food ecosystem, early adopters on the consumer side can start making this movement a reality, right? So I think that's...
Yeah, I mean, business can't afford to wait. That's why you're embedding it into business strategy. These investments now really matter for the resilience of the company, for the supply chains and the value chains that you're part of, and for the work that you're leading. And with that, maybe I can come back to Hugh one, because there's been quite a lot of investment by ADM into your sustainability strategies. You've really seen this as a point of advantage for the organization as you've navigated what have been tough waters. What is it that you've really seen work the best in these types of investments and the partnerships that go along with it?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think something that we need to be mindful, as Ramon was saying, is there is a farmer in the middle here. And I think one of the good things of having more than 50 countries represented here is that one of the difficulties of leading sometimes is that if we don't have consistent systems to measure carbon, even at the farm level, we can confuse the farmer onto what is the right thing to do. And the last thing we need in the world is a two-tier system in which some grain trade at a certain quality and some grain trade at a different one. So we are all in the same planet, This is a time for all to collaborate. If we cannot agree that destroying this planet is a problem, then we will never make progress in anything. So that I think is important. The farmer is looking at all of us and saying, okay, what do I do next? And what is the right direction? So consistency around the world will be important. I think the second thing is innovation. I think that we are convinced from an ADM perspective, there is a confluence right now of progress in physics and biology sciences and computing sciences that is bringing an era of innovation and progress into agriculture or food that traditionally have been relatively stable industries, if you will. We see in that not only with the partnerships we have here, but we have invested in our ventures group in more than 20 companies, probably worth today our portfolio north of $500 million, where you have people all the way to making protein from air or from CO2 to distributed protein to carbon capture and sequestration. We've been leaning on innovation for a very long time. I've been told that ADM launched the first veggie burger in the 70s. Of course, apparently it didn't taste as good as we managed to deliver today, so no, that's why maybe we didn't hear about plant-based burger for 20 years. But we've also been operating the first Category 6 carbon capture and sequestration unit since 2011. We have captured already 3.5 million tons safely underground. So my point is working with governments around the world, working with partners, working with farmers, working with companies like the one on the stage. I think there is a lot of opportunity to make progress. I am very optimistic. At this point in time, and I think I'm speaking for everybody on the panel, I don't think you hold one discussion, at least in ADM, where we are not talking about food security, climate change, or health and well-being for the planet or the people. I think there is no more light between strategy and sustainability, if you will. So it comes from your shareholders, it comes from the consumers, it comes from your own employees. Yep. It comes from your family. As a father of a 30-year-old male and a 27-year-old woman, you are exposed to the responsibility that you have to drive a positive change at the scale. So I'm optimistic. We need to accelerate, but I'm optimistic about the time we're in.
Yeah, and I think you've just outlined some really major leading, I would say cutting edge investments that ADM is making. Having it in the edge in all of the conversations that you're having as a business, getting out in front on things like CCS to test how do we make this work. But also, I like what you pointed to, which is we have to be able to send consistent signals and asks to the farmer. Because right now, the number of frameworks and data requests that they're receiving is confusing. It's very overwhelming. We need to simplify that to make it move faster. And Sarah, with that, I'm going to come to you. You are in many ways closest to the farm and the data that's being asked for. And then I'll come back to Julie on how we tie it together. But what are you hearing from farmers? How do we help simplify this for them? And what do we here need to do to help make that happen?
Yeah, I mean, there's data and then there's standards, and I think standards and standardization is sort of what we're talking about. And there's oftentimes two types of standards that emerge. Sometimes standards emerge from the private industry, confluencing around something and agreeing upon it, and other times it emerges from the ways in which governments come together to do effective reporting, right? So when you think of standards and standards that will sort of affect, I think, carbon markets as a whole and what is going to be used, one of the things that we see is complete inconsistency today, because there's many small private industry players essentially going after it, but really I think this is where the role of government comes in handy, because then those standards can be financed, right? Because you just don't create the standards when you create these markets. The markets need to be regulated. When you come into regulation, then there's all sorts of rules that come into it. So one is like, how do we come up with effective reporting mechanisms to create some ways across sort of countries to measure and look at things, right? And I think, because again, this goes back to, I think what Juan was referring to, which is you can literally have a two-tier system if we don't watch out, because you will have markets where there's large commercial agriculture in place. sort of have one tier, and then you'll have sort of that rest of the world, which from a population standpoint is much bigger than sort of what that tier 1 market would be. So I think really starting to think about sort of what are the standard measures. What does the science actually tell us what we can measure and what we can't measure? Because I think some of the dangers around sort of data, and this is where sort of data quality comes in, is I think there's a lot that's out there that's actually scientifically, maybe we're not there yet to be able to actually measure. So how are we intellectually honest about what is actually possible and start there, and then as the science progresses, we then sort of continue to sort of improve the standardization. And then the other thing I would say is regular reporting, right? If you look at sort of energy markets, and I always use energy markets as an analogy here, but the reason that sort of energy markets are so much more efficient than our food systems is that the production of energy is 1, highly concentrated, 2, highly regulated, 3, incredibly expensive to produce. So you have fewer producers, and you have highly regulated markets. So governments, there's actually a consistency in the way in which governments actually do their reporting. When you think about agriculture, you can have a half-acre farm and you can have a 100,000-acre farm somewhere in Brazil. And you can, so it's highly fragmented, and it's also not like a few different products, which what the energy industry is. Agriculture is tens of thousands of different products and ingredients if you start to look at spices and all sorts of other things that we're not talking about in sort of the commodity world. So I think this idea of standardization becomes really critical, but the energy markets work as well as they do because government actually does play a very big role in sort of that regulatory framework. So thinking around what the role of government is going to be absolutely critical, or else we'll have sort of carbon markets that start and fail, start and fail, start and fail.
Yeah, I think that comparison between the energy market and the food markets is particularly relevant as we move into COP28, where we lift them both up to talk about what are the actions that are needed. Here, what are the solutions and innovations that we can deliver? What's the role of business and what's the role of government in enabling that to move faster and to happen? And you brought up a really important point, Sarah, that I want to emphasize, and that is the role of integrity. And integrity, particularly in food and agriculture, is critical. We need to be able to understand what drives high integrity reporting. How do companies who are leading and doing the level of investment that we see with the examples here, how do we help ensure that we're avoiding the risk of greenwashing and how we're driving that through reporting and delivering action and how we're engaging? And with this, I want to come back to you, Julia, because a lot of the very technical work, as you pointed out, is part of what's necessary to help ensure this integrity space. Can you speak a little bit more to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, first of all, so exciting to know that 58 of the top 100 food and beverage companies have already made commitments to regenerative agriculture. We were not there even 4 years ago when we were doing this work. The question becomes, how do we make sure that we can quantify those investments so that that information can be pulled through to the right points across the value chain? How does the farmer interact with the solution? How does the retailer, the end customer? And so what I think is critically important is to be able to employ solutions, again, that have a high degree of integrity, that make it easier to quantify the impact of regenerative agriculture so that that number can show up in all the places where it can make a difference. I was talking to a customer recently and she said, Julia, we often make the work of net zero seem so complex, but it isn't complex, it's really simple. I, as a global food and beverage company, I get to net zero by selling more low emissions products. And so there are a couple of points in there that are important. We need to be able to quantify the emissions impact of our products, and we need to be able to sell more of them by messaging that impact. All of this is interesting as a conversation, but when you think about it in light of the emerging consumer thesis, it becomes incredibly interesting. McKinsey and Nielsen recently did a study, and it showed that consumers expect businesses to take action on climate change even more than they expect governments. And so brands really are in a unique position to leverage high-quality data to create powerful stories so that consumers can engage in the change that we need.
We're going to be seeing more and more of that, I'm sure. The demand is not just here in the US market, it's actually rising globally. And this aspect of being able to have clear traceability, high integrity information, really consistent standards and expectations for performance so that the reporting and the finance flows can be accelerated and be clear lines back all the way through to the rural communities that will thrive more when we get this right is absolutely key. So I'm going to come to a few closing comments with this. And again, we want to leverage this particular moment. We're here as a huge drumbeat event into COP28. We've already spoken to the role it's going to play in elevating the food and agriculture agenda even higher into the climate discussions. We know coming off of the very successful Kunming-Montreal CBD COP15 negotiations in December, we now have a global biodiversity framework that's compatible and aligned, if we get the numbers and the investments right, with our climate 1.5 trajectory and objectives. We know that the COP28 presidency is going to be looking for ways to bring this investment on climate and nature together, and agriculture sits at the heart of that. So if you had something that you're really hoping to see accomplished into this COP, and maybe even let's think about how it becomes a springboard forward into the next few years towards 2025. What are you most hoping to see? What can we leverage from here into November 30th for what we want to accomplish when we're together in Dubai?
Yeah, I can get started. I think first we should celebrate the fact that food and agriculture is starting to be at the center of the debate on how we decarbonize the world. And so that's a major breakthrough, because 3 or 4 COPs ago, there was no conversation at all. So food, I've attended a few, food was not part of the solution. So I think we have an opportunity now that we're at the center of these conversations to make a lot of progress. So let's celebrate that fact, take advantage of it. Now, I think obviously there is policy that can help the transition, and as always, in any transition, there's some early adopters, and I think we need to reward the early adopters disproportionately, probably in this case, so that the early adopters take more adopters and more adopters. I'm thinking about farmers at this point. I think when you go to the local communities, the farmers that are leading edge and they're adopting regenerative practices are not being seen many times as the leaders in that community. There's some skepticism yet. I think we need to make them the heroes of those communities. We need to help them financially, the insurance premiums, lower cost financing. There's many ways we can reward those farmers so that they're more resilient, they have better P&Ls, and they take everybody with them. We have to help them with technology, all the innovation. So there has to be policy, I think, that enables the farmers to be the early adopters. At the same time, I think for the companies that were in this transformation, we would appreciate simplicity and would appreciate standards around the world, some sort of commonality that makes the cost of reporting, the cost of adopting to these new realities much more easier in a way. Now, I think carbon markets, as I said earlier, we need to somehow enable carbon markets. This would be great flow of financing that if it ends up in the farmers' P&L, that would be super beneficial. It would really create new behaviors that we need for them to adopt these new practices. And then maybe not the purpose for COP, but we need to find a way to convince consumers that they can make a difference with their choices. And that is not in consumers' minds yet, right? So they think sustainability as a huge concept. I can talk to, if you think about our company, we're making changes in agriculture, we're making changes in adopting electrical trucks, we're making changes in electrifying our factories. So a lot of transformation. Consumers don't get it that if they buy certain products, they will create a massive transformation from farming all the way up. And that has to be enabled through simple symbols, easy to understand indicators that they can make choices, and we can help this transformation. Now, the other thing I would say, I think farmers need a voice. The fact that we don't have farmers here is not a good idea, I think, for the transformation when they are the center of the transformation. We need to give farmers a voice. We're trying to do it with some of our brands. I don't know if you guys have seen Lay's, who's one of our, our largest brands. You have a QR code on Lay's that connects you to the farmer where that potato was grown. And then suddenly the farmer is telling the story, and the farmer is telling the new practices and how he's growing his potatoes. I think we need to connect consumers to farmers in a unique way. That would generate the transformation. The brands have a unique role to play. I take it that some people are saying companies need to be ahead of governments. I think this is a partnership. The governments can help us de-risk in many areas the transformation, and that's the role public financing should have. But I think we're in a good place. Let's take this opportunity and then lead into COP30, right, in Brazil in a couple of years, where we have clearly an opportunity to make a difference.
Yeah, thank you, Ramon. I think you've laid out a very nice trajectory for how all these pieces need to come together and reinforcing the role of business in there. And so with that, let me come to you, Juan, for some additional thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think a lot has been covered already. There is something that it always bugs me, and we haven't been able to solve or make a lot of progress, is food waste and food loss. You notice your very polite waiters always ask you, have you finished, sir, before removing, because you leave food on your plate. We throw away about 30% of the food we make. 30%. There's no level of inefficiency in any company that resists something like that. We look at 5% productivity, 3% here, 30% waste. It's incredible that, and food security and climate change are hand in hand. 30% food waste means 3.5 gigatons of CO2 that we throw away every year. 1.3 billion tons of food we throw away every year. So I think we need to find a way to have that discussion. That's the best way to save resources in the planet. So we think that at ADM, agriculture and food security are intrinsically linked to us being able to expand the carrying capacity of our planet. As we march to have 10 billion people in 2050, we need to make that. And ADM is committed to have a leadership role in working at the confluence of food security and environmental stewardship.
Yeah, thank you. I'm so glad you raised this point of food waste, because we can reduce the pressure on the system and on productivity levels required if we can also address and really lower food waste. Important point. Let me come to you, Julia, as well. Maybe you can pick up a little bit on some of the themes we've heard already from Ramon and Juan as we go into COP28.
Yeah, I mean, certainly so many good things have already been said, right? We need to center farmers in the conversation. We need to standardize global methodologies and frameworks, right? All of these things are important. I often get asked, Julia, what's the one thing that I could do as an individual? What is the single thing? And of course, there is no silver bullet solution to addressing climate change. Otherwise, we wouldn't have this lovely lunch. But I will say that to vote is one of the most powerful things that we can do as individuals and as leaders of our organizations. And that really is, I think, a great parting words from myself.
Great, thank you. Let me come to you, Sarah. Closing words for our panel here today. Take away for what we want to see into COP28.
Yeah, I'm going to take it to the adaptation conversation here, because I think one of the things is, I think the dialogue around adaptation to our food system, for our food systems, we're probably 20 years behind from where, we're 20 years where mitigation was, right? And I think that the one thing to keep in mind is, when people talk about the IPCC report or the IPCC, people assume the IPCC is a single source of data. It's not. The IPCC collects data from 100 labs around the world that have supercomputers that have been modeling the trajectory of our climate, out to 2100. And the one thing that's not talked about frequently enough right now is that there are 5 carbon pathways that these labs essentially look at, and probabilities that they essentially play out. And what people don't understand when we're talking about climate change and the effects of climate change is that, and the 1.5 degree sort of pathway, is that it's not to actually avert the changes we're going to see regardless between now and 2050. So when you look at the probability distribution of outcomes for what climate change is going to do to our food systems between today and 2050, under all 5 scenarios, i.e. if we took the most aggressive actions to reduce our carbon footprint or did nothing, that probability distribution of outcomes is very tight, right? Which means that there is a lot of debt that we are going to be repaying over the next 15 to 20 years that regardless of the actions that we take today, we're gonna have to pay for. And they're very expensive. And so unless we sort of bring adaptation to the forefront of the conversation as well, we could be in dire sort of straits because the economic impact associated with the loss and damage associated with our food systems could be really great. And we started to see it. I mean, we just came out of 3 years of La Nina, which was itself a historic event, which destroyed crops and created, record droughts across the US and South America. And now we're going right into El Nino, which, yes, will provide some relief in the US and will provide some relief to South America, but we'll just shift over to Australia and Russia and Ukraine. And so we're seeing, when we talk about sort of climate change, we're not just talking about the fact that the planet's getting warmer. It's fundamentally getting more volatile. And when you have more volatility embedded in a system, you better have plans in place to handle that volatility and to hedge the risks associated with that volatility. So my one big sort of wish is really sort of bringing adaptation to the forefront of the food system conversation as well, because the resilience of farmers is absolutely critical for the system to continue. And we could be taking all the best actions in the world today, and we still have debt that's due. So
Sarah, I think you just did an amazing job placing why this is so central in business strategy today, why it is so central that business is actually leading, investing, taking actions, and why we're seeing a huge acceleration from just individual company action to value chain action and this public-private partnership space of co-financing, co-innovating as a huge accelerator. So know that that's the contribution that we'll continue to bring in. You've heard a large suite of actions and solutions from our panel of business leaders here today. And I'd like to just give you all a huge thank you and a huge symbol of appreciation for what you're doing and what we will all come behind and continue to drive. So thank you so much to our panel.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. With that, we welcome our organizers back on stage to help us understand what our next steps are from this beautiful lunch. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Well done, that was great.
Well, we hope this meal has given you the energy you need for even more great events this afternoon. It certainly generated a lot of conversation in the room. 6 breakout sessions will take place this afternoon, 3 beginning at 2:30, and then following a coffee break hosted by the California Almond Board, we'll have 3 more sessions at 4 o'clock. Happening alongside the breakout sessions is the second Aim for Climate Ministerial, co-chaired by the United States and the United Arab Emirates in Salon D of the Capitol Ballroom. Please remember to visit the interactive exhibit hall, open until 5 p.m.
And tomorrow we will start day 2 with a breakfast hosted by FMC from 7:30 a.m. to 8:30 a.m. with a keynote from Dina Esposito, the assistant to the administrator for the Bureau for Resilience and Food Security at USAID. And the morning high-level plenary will follow at 9 a.m. here Eastern Time, which will feature keynotes by His Excellency Mohammed Musa Al-Amiri, the Assistant Undersecretary for Food Diversity at the UAE Ministry of Climate Change and Environment, as well as U.S. Senator Debbie Stabenow followed by a panel discussion with trailblazing women in science. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon breakout sessions, followed by a happy hour reception sponsored by Corteva here at 5 p.m. at the Grand Ballroom. Thank you again for a great plenary, and enjoy the rest of your day.